Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll wait for some time to allow all participants to join in. Meanwhile, while we wait for others to join in, I would like to do a couple of housekeeping checks. So, if you can hear me clearly, I request you to please type yes in the chat box. I repeat, if you can hear me clearly, please type yes in the chat box. Okay, I can see a couple of positive responses. So it seems the audio is working fine and I'm good to go ahead. We would like this to be an interactive session and therefore would encourage participants to send in their questions and comments using the questions pane on their right hand side. The webinar recording and the slide deck will be made available to all the attendees, so you need not worry about those things. Okay, we are good to go right now. First of all, on behalf of Harbinger Systems, a warm welcome to all of you and good morning and good afternoon. I am Lalit Kumar, Business Analyst at Harbinger Systems and your host for today's webinar. I have almost 4 years of experience and I have worked in multiple projects in various domains, and in my role I interact with customers to understand their business needs, analyze their requirements, and then document them so that they can be used by development teams to build the solutions. I am pleased to welcome you for today's webinar, Create Scalable and Configurable Multi-tenancy Applications. I introduce our fellow presenter for today's session, Chinmay Srikhande. Chinmay is software engineer at Harbinger Systems and has been part of various teams where multi-tenant solutions have been developed. Chinmay has worked in various technologies ranging from WebRTC, Ruby on Rails, Node.js, Redis, and many more. So without any further delay, let's begin today's webinar. So before diving deep into the webinar, let's just run through the agenda for the webinar. So initially we'll talk about what multi-tenancy is and the business scenarios where multi-tenancy is useful. Then we will talk about some of the methodologies of building a multi-tenant architecture, and along with that we will also talk about some of the benefits of going with multi-tenant architecture. Then Chinmay will talk to you about technical considerations while you work with a multi-tenant architecture. And towards the end, we will showcase some of Harbinger's work that has gone into creating multi-tenant applications. Okay, so let's begin with understanding what multi-tenancy is. So if I have to put it in a very simple terms, it's a software architecture in which you design the application in such a way that a single instance of the application is able to support multiple tenants. And when I say tenants, I mean your business clients and not the end users of the product. So what would happen in a multi-tenant solution is a single application, that is the source code, OS, hardware, data storage mechanism, or for that matter any other resource that is required to run the software will be shared amongst all the tenants. Now this is exact opposite of a single instance approach where each tenant would have dedicated set of resources for running the application. One more point very important to multi-tenancy is, since the application is being shared among multiple customers, there are security and privacy concerns with respect to data. Hence, a data isolation mechanism across tenants is an important part of multi-tenant architecture. So this was a brief overview of multi-tenancy. Now let's move on to talk about some of the business scenarios where multi-tenancy is really helpful. So multi-tenancy really comes when you are building an application that would cater to businesses which have their own end users. So to give you an example, it could be an e-learning solution for schools and colleges for which the end users would be teachers and students. It could very well be an healthcare application as well, wherein the end users are doctors and other medical staff. So if you are building an application that is meant to cater businesses, then definitely you should consider multi-tenancy. Now, if you have to if we see a very real world practical scenario, when you are working with multiple businesses, there are bound to be requirements that would be different from one business to another business. So in such a situation, one needs to evaluate whether all the requirements need to be built in one single solution or where one should go for a single instance approach. Based on our work at Harbinger Systems here, we feel there are certain set of requirements, even though if they vary across tenants, they can very well be built in a single solution based on multi-tenant architecture. So let's not talk about some of those requirements here. So in any business organization, when users are performing their roles, they are bound to perform their roles within certain rules and policies. These rules and policies typically dictate, or I would say tell, which resources or what permission a user has and what permission a user does not have. Now, such policies would definitely vary from one organization to another organization. All such policies of different organizations can very well be built in a single multi-tenant solution by making use of role-based access control that is built using access control lists. So using role-based access controls, all the policies can very well be supported in a multi-tenant solution. Now, moving from users to processes. So definitely in any given organization, the processes followed are different from another organization. So again, I'll give you an example here. So if it's an onboarding application or onboarding process, then an organization may have 5 steps in the onboarding process, whereas another organization may just have 3 steps. Now, these are similar requirements, but with some customization. Such requirements can very well be again built into a multi-tenant solution by making use of templates. So if the solution has templates, they can be made available to all the tenants, and then tenants could extend those templates as per their needs. Another requirement that is fairly common when we are dealing with businesses is not all businesses would want your complete solution. There are specific needs of every businesses. So a particular business unit may need only subset of the solution. So the solution needs to be really modular enough to cater to all the businesses. Again, this can very well be part of a multi-tenant solution wherein tenant level configurations would dictate which modules are available to which tenant. And okay, so one of the very common requirement is from the tenants are to have specific brandings on the solution. So the tenants wants, when their end users are using the product, they should see their own branding. And how important is branding in today's world is known to everyone. Again, building this thing in multi-tenant solution is very easy. You need to have presentation layer configurations in your solutions, and with those presentation layer configurations, the tenant level specific branding can very well be done. So these were some of the business scenarios where multi-tenancy really fits in. And so we'll now move ahead and talk about some of the methodologies of achieving multi-tenancy at data level. So as I had initially mentioned, data isolation is an important part of multi-tenant architecture. So there are few methods, so we'll talk about them here. So first of them is separate databases. So in this approach, a dedicated database is allotted for each tenant to store its data. So over here, the data isolation is strictly at the database level. This is the most secure because each tenant based data resides in a separate database. And this is also the most expensive because of the same reason. A second intermediary approach is within the same database with separate schema. So over here, the data of different tenants would reside in a single database, but then they would be grouped into separate schema. This would offer you a moderate degree of data isolation because in case database is compromised, then data for all tenants should be compromised. The third approach is wherein you have the data within the same database and the same schema. Over here, the data differentiation isolation would happen on the basis of a tenant metadata. This is the least secure of them all, but since all the data resides within same database and within same schema, this is also the cheapest of them all. So depending on what type of data you want to support in your application, an appropriate approach needs to be selected. Okay, now moving on to benefits of multi-tenancy. So having looked at business scenarios and overview of multi-tenancy, now let's talk about what benefits does multi-tenancy offer. So one of the primary benefits that multi-tenancy offers is scalability. So as I had pointed earlier, it's a single solution that is being used from all the tenants. So in case you feel the number of tenants are expected to grow or the size of a tenant is expected to grow, you can very well plug in more hardware into the solution and then the solution can easily scale. And this upgrade would benefit all the customers and not just one particular customer. Another benefit that comes with multi-tenancy is if in case you are about to roll out a new feature in your product or there are compliance requirements that require you to update your software, then all such updates can be pushed to all customers at once. Remember, it's one single solution that is serving all customers. So if you upgrade that particular solution, all customers will benefit. Now the third point which comes into benefits of multi-tenancy is improvement in utilization of resources. So if you consider a case of a single instance approach, there might very well be a case that a resource that is allocated for a tenant is not being utilized all the time. But the chances of this happening in a shared environment is very less as the resources are being shared and it's more likely that a tenant is using a particular resources. So overall, this will lead to better utilization of resources and less cost for you. Another point which extends the easy upgrades part is it's easier and cheaper to maintain a multi-tenant solution. Imagine a scenario wherein you get an issue comes up. Now you need not identify which instance has caused the issue. It's just one single solution there. You would have logs for one single solution. You can look at the logs, identify the issue, and the best part is when the fix is made available, this will be available to all the clients at once. So essentially, all the clients would be running the same version of the application always. So I talked to you about multi-tenancy overview, business scenarios, and its benefits. Now I would like to invite Chinmay, my fellow presenter, to talk to you about technical considerations while working with multi-tenancy.
Thanks, Lalit, for giving an insight about the multi-tenancy and how it gives an added advantage in the business. So now we'll look into the technical aspect of multi-tenancy. We'll look more in about the technology selection process that should be considered. Then we'll look into the database design, or what all aspects should be considered while designing a database. Then we'll also look into the security aspect from technical point of view and the customized infrastructure. So moving to the technology selection aspect, while developing a multi-tenant SaaS application, it is very important from development and maintenance point of view to provide customers with a centralized, network-based, easy to access data. So cloud computing provides efficiency, security, flexibility, and many more advantages. Looking at these benefits provided by having our application to be deployed in cloud, selecting a technology which binds well with cloud and has easy deployment gives an added advantage. Moreover, if the build deployment process is automated, then promoting new builds becomes a very easy task. Now, while designing any application, the base architecture performs a very crucial part while developing the application. In case of multi-tenancy, the architecture should be such that at any point of time it should be possible to add configurable features and models onto the existing one. The base architecture should be strong enough to support a good amount of customization and also should be compatible with future enhancements and extensions. Many times it is required for the architecture to work in collaboration with other technologies. This is mostly when the application scales as per the number of tenants added to it. Thus, architecture compatibility of the technology selected should be carefully looked, as it is the base on which the application is built. Generally, after some period of time, it is observed that the performance of the application goes down. The natural reason for this is because the number of tenants goes on increasing and the resource utilization becomes more crunch. So to optimize the performance from initial point of view, the technology selected should be able to tune the performance such that the resources are utilized to their optimum, and also to be able to add resources as and when required. Also, to avoid this situation, it is recommended to have the expected number of prospects which would be using the application, and based on these prospects, a load testing should be performed on the application and to be tested if the application is giving the expected results. Another aspect of technology selection is how well it integrates with other technologies. Nowadays, applications are being designed by combining two or more technologies to have the benefits of each. Now, this type of architecture of using multiple technologies is termed as polyglot type of architecture. Now, polyglot architecture is better at targeting different problems efficiently. Thus, while selecting a technology, it should be considered how the base technology supports communication or integration with other technology. That is, how rich is the API base of the base technology. Now, other aspect of while selecting a technology is data migration support. Now, data migration is required to modify the existing schema structure, or it is also used to feed default data into the application. Now, when we say data migration in terms of multi-tenancy, there is a requirement to have different type of schema for different tenants, also to feed different set of data for different tenants. Now, the ease with which this can be done depends upon the technology that we are using. If this activity is complex for a specific technology, then this activity gets sluggish. So it is very important to consider this aspect as well. Now, various companies, organizations, and governments are subject to regulatory law that affects how they store their records or how security is applied. So in such cases, application developed should follow all the compliances which are laid on. Another aspect of while technology selection is the community support. Nowadays, many new technologies are rising in the market, and most of them also supports multi-tenancy architecture. But the another fact of this aspect is that these newly developed technologies are coming in the open source market. One should be very careful while selecting technology from this stack, as it might be in the beta phase. Also, the population of users using it should be considered, and the community support should also be taken into account while selecting. The stronger the community support, the better is the life of the technology. So this was all about the aspects which should be considered while technology selection. We'll have a look into the database design aspect. Now, as explained earlier by Lalit, that generally database is stored using logical separation or having shared schema in a shared database, or by having physical separation. Now, in case of logical separation, the data is separated based on namespace. That is, if we are having two tenants, for example, tenant A and tenant B, then all the data related to tenant A is stored by having a prefix A, or the prefix can be predefined using some specific logic. In case of shared database architecture, the database instance running is the same, is a single instance, and the schema is shared within all the tenants. Here the database segregation is achieved by having a specific unique key which represents the tenant. For example, organization ID or tenant ID is used to segregate the data. Now, when we store data in physical separation method, the actual data is stored in separate files. Now here the database instance running could be a single database instance, or it could be multiple data instances. So when we have an overview look of the database design, we can segregate into two parts. One is the shared database and another one is the isolated database. Now when we have to choose between one of these, we can consider four factors. The first factor is the economic factor. Now in case of shared database design, the initial cost is less, since we need to have only a single database instance running. But when the development, the initial effort required for developing the application is more, as complex logic has to be applied to segregate the data access through application level. But in case of isolated, the economic cost initially is high, but the time or efforts invested in developing it is quite less. Now when we consider the number of tenants which will be used in the application, then more the number of tenants are there, shared database design is more preferred, as it is economically beneficial, and when the number of tenants are less, then isolated is preferred. But here one more aspect should also be considered, that is the customization that is being used per tenant. That is, if the customization request per tenant is more, then it is preferred to go for the isolated database design. Again, the security offered by shared is definitely less as compared to isolated, but security in case of shared database design can be applied by having interface from application layer. Another aspect is how the database is stored. If there are compliances or regulatory compliances which says that your data should be stored in a specific manner, then based on this regulatory aspects, it should be decided whether we have to go on with the shared database design or we have to opt for the isolated one. Another aspect of database design is the extensibility patterns. Now, extensibility patterns refers to the extensions that are being applied to the database. Now, to give an example of this, in case of SQL database, we add extensions to the table by adding more columns to it. The reason behind this is to store more attributes for that specific table. Now, this specific extensibility pattern, when we want to apply it to a multi-tenant architecture, then in that case, there are requirements that specifies to have a specific extensibility pattern for tenant A and to have a different extensibility pattern for tenant B. Here, the complexity of applying the extensibility pattern comes into picture. Also, along with this, another aspect is the backup, how the database backup is done. The main reason is when restoration of a specific tenant is to be done, then it should not affect other data which is used by other tenants. So this was all about the database design aspect. Now we'll look into the security aspect of multi-tenancy. Security can be divided into two parts. First is the application level and second is the database level. Now when we say security in terms of application level, the first thing that comes into mind is the authorized access. Definitely the application should be allowing all the authorized users to access into the application and restrict all the unauthorized users. Along with this aspect, the users should not be able to access data from other tenants. Now in a typical multi-tenant architecture, there are three users or three levels of users. First is the super admin user, second is the account admin user, and third are the general users. Now super admin is the user who creates new tenants or who configures what all features should be accessible or accessed by other tenants. Account admin is the user who has control over the account specifications that are being provided by super admin, and users are the general users or the end users which access the application. Now in many cases, super admin can access the tenant's data. This particular scenario is required when super admin wants to observe a specific scenario or to debug a specific scenario. But on contrary, there are some domains which restrict super admin visibility to the tenants. For example, in case of finance applications, they do not want their data to be accessed by even by the super admin, since the data is very much confidential. Another security provided is the tenant data encryption. Here the tenant's data stored is encrypted so that even if the database is being accessed by a third party or an unauthorized person, the data cannot be read as it is encrypted. Now moving on to the database level security, since we are having multiple databases storing different tenants' data, there should be separate database admins to access these databases. For a specific tenant has a requirement to access a data, then only the database admin credentials of that specific database provided, so as that tenant will not be able to access other tenants' data at any cost. Another aspect is to have audit logs to be maintained for any CRUD operation that is being performed on the database. That is, if any create, update or destroy action is performed on the database, then a log entry is maintained along with the user who has performed that operation. This enables to have the root cause for any particular scenario which is unauthorized. So this was all about the security aspect. Now moving on to how infrastructure can be customized. Here again we can divide it into two parts. One is the service infrastructure and another is the resource infrastructure. Now service infrastructure offers all the services that is being given by the application. Now service which can be customized is the look and feel that the application offers. Since the customers are different, there may be different preferences for the look and feel or the branding that is expected by the customer. So a configurable UI design and feel is generally offered in a multi-tenant application. Another aspect is the different modules or the different base features of the application. So the preference to have a specific application feature depends on the customer's requirement. Now to configure this, a role permission is built upon these modules so that the restriction of having access to a particular feature or to not have a particular feature is done using the role permission. Based on this, service infrastructure can be customized. Now moving on to resource infrastructure. Now resource infrastructure can be considered as the hardware resources or the CPU usage that is required. Now there is a possibility that a particular tenant in the application consumes a lot of resources while the other requires the base or minimal resources to run the application. So in this specific scenario, we can add resources to the tenant which requires more and reduce the resources from the tenant which does not require it. So this can be done by having or adding the resources on demand basis. So this was all about customizing the infrastructure. Now let's have a look into some of the use cases. But before looking into the use cases, let's have a look at the technology stack that we'll be referring to in the use cases. Now if we look here, we have a combination of open source technologies as well as the proprietary technologies. Now here Ruby on Rails, OrientDB, PostgreSQL and Solar are from the open source stack, and Microsoft.NET and Microsoft SQL Server are from the proprietary technology stack. So the first use case that we'll be talking about is the cloud-based social learning and mentoring application. Here there was a requirement to have a platform wherein the organizations can effectively utilize and manage their employee skills. Here the platform offered should be collaborative enough so that the employees will connect to other employees which are having their skills or interest areas aligned, so that they can collaborate with each other, and the final result would be the enhanced skill set of the organization. Another requirement was to have a scalable application which will serve diverse users. Also, there was a need to have a feature-based selection. so that it would be easy to select a few features from the feature list as per the customer's requirement. Another aspect was to have high user engagement so as to involve them more and more into the application. So this was about the scenario. Now we'll look into the solution. Looking at the requirements presented in the use case, we recommended to have a multi-tenant architecture which would fit perfectly for this business scenario. We recommended to have a collection of open source technology to build this application. Graph database was used to store the social collaborative as the connections represented the links and the users represented the edges. Graph database was an ideal storage unit. The complete application package was then deployed onto cloud to be accessed from any place. Now for the super admin to configure the new accounts and the services to be offered for them, account management module was designed, which enabled the super admin to easily configure the services for the tenants. Also, a recommendation engine was developed which would pre-populate suitable mentors based on the user's SKs and his interest areas. For the account admin, data reports, audit reports and performance reports were given so that the overall skill development in the organization could move smoothly. The resultant of this rapid development of the multi-tenant application enabled the client to enter into the market quickly with an intelligent virtual application and gain an added advantage in the market. This was a showcase of Harbinger's efficiency in social learning domain. Now I would request Lalit to showcase use case in other domains.
Thanks, Chinmay, for the insights. Okay, so let's talk about this use case now. So this was an HCM application that was to be meant for enterprises. So let's talk about the scenario over here. What were the expectations from the clients? So this application was meant to serve enterprises, but one of the core requirements was a single implementation was desired, a single solution that is capable enough of serving all enterprises or all customers. So one of the main reasons for this was because easy maintenance of the solution was required. It was required that it should be easy to maintain the solution. Now, since we are talking about an HCM application, it would have sensitive data from the tenants. Now, it was a very critical requirement that data security is to be kept at a very high level. So the data had to be separated at a very secure level. Another requirement was modular offering. So the tenant should be able to choose what modules do I need. Now all these points are really pointing towards a multi-tenant solution, and so the final thing that was to be evaluated was what sort of customizations would be needed when we are talking about the different businesses. So then we evaluated what were the customizations. So it were the branding, access control, and the customizable workflows. So all this was like the perfect scenario for a multi-tenant solution. So Harbinger used its experience and came up with the solution. The picture is shown over here. So a layered architecture was developed where a separate business layer and the presentation layer was there. Now the single code base helped for the easy maintenance of the solution. The database was crafted and designed in such a way that it could be extended for each tenant as per the specific needs. To enhance for the performance, load balancers were used at presentation layer as well as business layer. In addition to that, a separate reporting server was there so that the servers meant for business data, business logic are not overloaded with the reporting requests. So at present, the application supports more than 200 tenants, and an average data size for a tenant is 700 MB with a maximum data size of up to 16 GB. So overall, a great solution and a happy customer for Harbinger. Okay, so now we are coming towards the end of the webinar, but before that, I'd like to talk about few very important things that would really be important to the success of the multi-tenant architecture, that would really define the success of the solution. So first of them is the high availability. Now remember, we are using a single solution to serve all customers, and if there's a downtime, it would be a downtime for all the customers. So you have to make sure the solution is having a very high availability. Security. Now security, as we have been talking through the presentation, is very important. So evaluate very carefully what type of data isolation would work for you. Revisit it from time to time, because what was secure yesterday might not be secure today. And in case there's a breach, it might very well expose data from one tenant to another. So it has to be taken up very carefully. Another very critical important point is performance. Now it may happen that the tenant size varies from one another to another. So you do not want to get into a situation where a few large tenants are consuming resources and thereby hampering the performance of other tenants. So make sure you craft the solution in such a way that the performance is maintained for all the solutions. To build in such a robust solution, having an experienced partner like Harbinger Systems would help you a great deal. So we would like you to provide us the opportunity, talk to us, discuss with us, and then provide us the opportunity to build the solution for you, to build the solution for you in a very efficient manner. Okay. So with this, we are done with the webinar. We will now be going through the Q&A session. I again remind all of you to please type in your questions using the chat box over there. Okay, so I see we are receiving many queries, and so we'll try to answer as many as possible in the given time frame. So this looks a interesting one. So the question over here is, will multi-tenancy help me to launch my product fast in the market?
Yes, I'd like to take this question. I think yes, definitely multi-tenancy will help to launch a product very fast in the market. The reason behind this would be that the product can be introduced in the market when the basic features of the applications are ready, so that the application can be presented to the prospects. Moreover, the inputs from the prospects can be taken, and then based on these inputs or based on their inputs, the application can be configured. So this would be a developing phase, I would say, and this will definitely help to launch the product in the market really fast. Okay, let's have look at some other questions. Okay, here we have a question which says, what points one should consider while moving from single tenant application to multi-tenant application?
Okay, so I would answer this. So when you're talking about moving from a single tenant to to a multi-tenant architecture. So essentially we are talking about bringing in all the solutions for different tenants into one solution. So first of all, you need to identify what are the common features that are there in all the tenants. So those can very well be brought into one single solution. Now, another thing that you need to identify is what are the requirements that are very specific, different from business to business. Okay. Once you have done that, evaluate those requirements. What are the customizations that you would need to make those requirements in the solution? Another very important point is see what sort of data isolation mechanism would work for you. Bring in the factors, tenant number, data size of each tenant that is to be supported. Give a focus on all these points when you are moving from into a multi-tenant application. Okay. So another question that we would like to take up is, so it says, I want my multi-tenant web application to be accessed by different clients using different domain URLs. Is this possible using multi-tenancy? Also, I would like to have a common SSL certificate for all domains.
Yes, that's an interesting question. Just to clarify the question, I would like to repeat. The question says, to access the same common application, can we access it through different URLs? So yes, definitely we can access the same application using different URLs. So for example, the main application is accessed using a URL which says example.com, and there are tenants, say ABC or XYZ, those who want to access the same application but with a different URL, then definitely they can access through a URL which says abc.example.com or xyz.example.com. Now this type of URL is typically used in multi-tenant environment, and these are called as wildcard DNS records, or the URLs which are used are multiple domain names. So for example, the wildcard DNS record for this specific example would be star.example.com, so that all the subdomains prefixed before the example can be added runtime and it can be easily identified by the DNS. To answer the second question, whether we would want to have a common SSL certificate for all domains, yes, we could use a common SSL certificate for all domains into similar lines how we are registering the DNS record. So yes, we can definitely use a common SSL.
Okay. So we are really running short of time over here. So we'll try to squeeze in one last question over here, and then we'll respond to the other questions over the email. So the question over here is.
Yes, I think I have found an interesting question. It says that is multi-tenancy a good option for a startup?
Okay, so again, so the answer to this really depends on at which stage the startup is. So if the startup is at a very early stage and the product idea is still in validation mode, then multi-tenancy is not necessary, because most of the time when you are in validation phase you are working in a very close group, in a very limited number of with a very limited number of people. So if you are in a product validation phase, then multi-tenancy is not necessary for you. But as soon as you are confident about the product that you want to go to the market with this, then you should onboard multi-tenancy right from the start, because immediately the benefits may not be visible at a very early stage. But in long term, you will realize as the number of customers grow that multi-tenancy is really helping you. Okay, so with this, we have tried to answer as many questions as possible in the given time limits. With this, we conclude today's session. Once again, thank you all for joining us and have a great day ahead.